Hello and welcome to episode 66 of the DX Mentor, a discussion with Dan, KB6NU. Thank you for joining us. I'm Bill, AJB. If this is the first time you're joining us, welcome. We have a back catalog of over 60 episodes covering many aspects of DX. Please check us out. If you like what you find, please subscribe, like, and share to always be notified about upcoming events. Another way to keep in touch and to see what we're up to is via the DX Mentor Facebook page. I will be posting about upcoming podcasts as well as other DX events, so please follow us. Our guests today are Dan, KB6NU, and Joe, W8GEX. Dan and Joe are experienced, passionate operators, and the conversation should be lively and informative. Here's what KB6NU says about himself. Quote, "My mission, aside from making at least 3 CW contacts per day, is to help people have fun with ham radio. I tried to do this in a number of ways, well, I'm not going to tell you what it is. You're going to have to listen to the podcast because we go into those details. So check out Dan's blog at kb6nu.com and check out the rest of the podcast. So let's get started. Well, good evening and welcome to the DX Mentor podcast. And boy, Joe and I are thrilled tonight. We are once again in that mode where we're just going to sit back and ask questions and learn a lot. And that's one of the great things about this podcast is that we have these really passionate guests. And I think Joe and I always coming away thinking, man, we thought we knew a lot. We didn't know anything until tonight. So we're really excited. I'm your host, Bill, AJ8B. And as always, Joe's with me, W8GEX. Good evening, Joe.
Well, good evening, Bill. Good evening, Dan. Like Bill said, I'm Joe. Been around for since 1955, or I'm sorry, since 1970. I don't want to make it worse than what it is. Got started on 6 meters, did a little DXing, got hooked on DXing, and start building my towers and antennas, and then start going on some trips, some big, some small. So far, I've been on 62, and still go to the Bahamas about once a year and play a little radio. But I'm pretty much a everyday ham. I get on every day. So Dan, tell us, how'd you get started?
Well, so I got started when I was a kid. My grandparents had an old Philco console radio in their basement, and it had a shortwave band on it, of course.
Yeah.
That's what radios had in those days. And I got hooked on listening to shortwave radio broadcasts. And I was fortunate, my dad was a mechanical engineer, but he built kits. He built hi-fi kits. So he never was a ham, but he was into electronics. So he encouraged me, and that's how I got started.
Well, I
I
came
got my
across,
license when I got ended up finally getting my license at 16 years old when I was 16. And the reason for that is there was no hams in my neighborhood. At least I couldn't see any ham radio antennas. So it took me a couple of years before I finally found a ham that would give me the test.
wow.
Yeah, so that's sort of how that worked. But I had a lot of fun doing shortwave listening and all. And,
So
and
you're in Michigan right now?
yeah, yeah. And I'm a Detroit native, even though I have a six land call.
Yeah, I was
I'm a
going to ask you
Detroit.
how KB6NU came around and
Yeah, yeah. Well, like I got a million stories, and so when I after I got out of college, I moved to California for a while, and my first call, by the way, was WB8KTZ. But so I went to California and worked in Silicon Valley for a couple of years, then moved to San Diego. But my first boss out there was also ham. W6TGE was his call sign. And one day he says to me, he says, "Hey Dan," he says, well, he was a general. We were both generals at the time. He says, "Why don't we take a day? Why don't we study a little bit? Take a day off one of these days and go up to San Francisco and get our advanced class licenses." And this is when you still had to go to the FCC office to take your
right.
license.
Yeah.
And I said, "Sounds fine to me, like blow a day off work, right?" And so we did it. A couple, 3, 4 weeks. We took the train up to San Francisco. We were in Sunnyvale at the time, And it was a beautiful day. Sometimes the weather up in Northern California can get kind of cloudy and cool, but it was a beautiful day, and we both passed the test. We had lunch and came back, and so that's how I got this call sign. That's the K, the 2x2 beginning with a K is a advanced class
Yeah.
call sign. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't even
I kept this call sign. I moved. I've been back in Michigan a long time now, and I sometimes joke that I moved back to Michigan because I couldn't take the perfect weather out there. But but uh, but I kept my call sign because when I got back to Michigan, I really wasn't all that active for a long time, and I just didn't see the need to change my call sign.
Sure.
And now people know me as KB6NU, so
Yeah.
this is my call sign for the rest of my life.
Yeah. I don't even think Joe knows this, but I went down I ended up being KB8DF. So
Mhm.
I was a novice and I went down and I took the general in advance and passed it. And I got KB8DF. But before I got the license, I'm a double E also, so I'm a junior in college, and I get a letter from the FCC, and it says, you did very well on your test. However, because I wasn't licensed no, I was licensed at the time, but they said we gave you the wrong general. There's two general class licenses. There's one for somebody that has a novice, and there's one for somebody that doesn't. And
Huh.
since you didn't, you have to either take the general again or you have to take the novice. And the novice you can take in Cincinnati, but the general you have to take in Detroit. And I thought, well, heck, I'll take the novice. So here I am. I'm sweating bullets because I'm thinking, could you see me failing my novice and not getting my advance, right? So,
Yeah.
but I ended up
Yeah,
with
yeah.
KB8DF, so that was okay. Um, well,
Well,
so
talk about sweating bullets. So I kept my advanced class license for a long time, and I was kind of not I want to say scared, but I was hesitant to take the extra because I
sure,
thought I might fail it if I didn't study enough. Because there's a lot of memorization involved in these
yeah.
tests, which unfortunate, which we can talk about later if you want. But I used to, so I put it off, put it off, put it off. I used to joke with people I wanted to be the last living advanced class licensee. But but then when I started doing study guides, I said, well, nobody's going to want to buy an extra class study guide from a guy who's only got an advanced class license. So I bit the bullet and took the
Yeah.
test.
The
Yeah.
problem with the extra, it's not the pressure. For me, it wasn't the pressure of the license. It was the pressure of a couple friends of mine that were already extras. And I
Uh,
thought, man, if I don't pass this, I'm going to beat up by the jokes until I do pass it. So I got to get through this.
so did you pass the 20 word per minute code test?
Yeah, I never had an issue, thankfully, for the code. I was,
Okay. So by the time I got around to taking the extra class test, there was no code test anymore.
oh,
Yeah.
So my friend, I got these two guys I go to lunch with all the time. We're good friends, and they're always on me about not being a real extra because I didn't take the 20 word per minute code test, and they both did.
Yeah. Yeah.
wow. It never
So
ends, huh?
so I'm glad to hear you're a real extra.
Yeah, I guess I'm real extra something. I don't know. What really impressed me, and when I was at Hewlett Packard, I was a Stephen Covey certified instructor, and even when I was coaching basketball, I used to do a mission statement for basketball. Here's what I want out of the team. So if I ever got into, a bind at tournament time or whatever, I could look back and say, no, here's what I stand for. Here's what's important. So here's the decisions I'm going to, and I do that for everything. I've never done it for ham radio or this podcast. So when I got to your blog and I started looking around, look you up, it is right there. And I'd like to read it. It says, my mission, aside from making at least 3 CW contacts per day, is to help people have fun with ham radio. I try to do this in a number of ways, and we're going to drill down on those ways in a minute. But my hat's off to you. I thought that was brilliant. It's like, I know what you stand for, I know what you're trying to achieve, and that's just a great idea. And I'm going to steal that and I'm going to follow up on it. So kudos to you.
Yeah, please do. Please do.
Man.
And it's a shame more people don't do it, Dan.
Yeah.
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 Like I said earlier at the introduction, I get on every day.
Yeah.
So,
And anything I got that I'm not using, I'll give to anybody.
so what do you got there, Joe, that we might,
Well, for you guys, I'm using everything.
oh, all right. So you've written the No Nonsense Amateur Radio License Study Guides, 20 things to do after you get your amateur radio license, and the CW
21.
Oh, 21. I'm sorry. You're right. And the CW Geek's Guide to Having Fun with Morse Code. And all of those really sound entertaining. Which one is
Yeah, and again, they're all geared toward helping people, have better experience with ham radio.
okay? And you made a comment a minute ago about memorization, and that's not really the way to learn it. Do you take a different approach then?
Well, no, because
Because you can't.
because well, yeah, but really you almost can't, right? So I teach, as you mentioned, I teach a lot of classes, and I teach a lot of one day tech classes, and so I go through all 413 questions in the question pool in 6 hours.
Okay.
So it's like, nah, you got to memorize this stuff. Not only that, and I used to take a lot of criticism for that. Everybody's saying, "Well, what can you teach in 6 hours?" And I mean, you can't really. But anyway, my theory is you learn more by getting a license than doing stuff than trying to do book learning and then before you get the license. That's my theory on it.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
So can you tell me a couple of the 21 things you do after you get your license?
oh sure, like join a club right off the bat. Find somebody to be your Elmer. Go to a ham fest. I even say this might be a little controversial. I say join the ARRL. You know what? I'm not sure I would give that advice today to 100%. But anyway, that's another matter.
Yeah.
What else is it? What else is in there? Learn CW. Study for your general. Um, I forget. If
Yeah.
I knew that, I would have had the book with me. I could have
No,
read
that's okay. Okay. One of the things that I found interesting in teaching in CW Ops Academy is how many people got in it and they said, I never thought I'd find this interesting. And I always thought it would be far too difficult. And once they get into it, it's not. What is difficult for the people that were in it and I worked 6 sessions was actually committing time every day. That was the big
right,
deal. That you
right,
cannot do it once a week. You just can't.
right,
And
right,
and once they did that, more often than not, they got it. So
right.
so what makes you a CW geek and what fun do you have with it?
Well, fortunately for me, CW was never difficult at all. I mean, I picked it right up, and so it's a lot of fun. And I don't know, what if I can put my finger on any one thing, but it's one of those things that you can sort of zone out and just operate CW, and it's a skill that once you get it, you can be proud of being able to do it, and it gets easier as you go, right? I mean,
Yep.
the more time you put into it, and one thing that I'm really encouraged by is we're getting more and more new operators all the time. And your CW Academy is part of it. One of the big things though is POTA, Parks on the
Yes.
Air.
Yeah.
And not only are they operating parks on the air, but now they're some more of them, not maybe a great percentage, but some percentage are becoming more rag chewer types now too. And I mean, this is wonderful. This is just great.
Sure.
We had Thomas K4SWL, who's a big POTA
Yeah.
guy on, and um, he just I couldn't believe the breadth of opportunity there is, and the guys that love to do it. And 2 years ago at the Dayton Ham Fest, we had the DX Forum, and the room it's a big room, but it was probably 75-80% full. And
Mhm.
Joe and I left, and then all of a sudden I realized it was cool in the morning. I left my sweatshirt there or something. I go back to get, and the POTA soda, it was after it. And Dan, there were people hanging from the rafters. They're piled up in
Oh
the
Yeah.
yeah.
doorway. They were
Yeah.
everywhere.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that is so
Absolutely.
exciting.
It's a blast. That talk about having fun. That I mean, it's just a blast. And here in Michigan, we have really nice parks. And I'm retired now, so you go out there and on a nice day and sit around by the lake and make some contacts.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very cool.
I,
And they all the equipment is tailored, is much more tailored now to that where, we we really
oh
couldn't
yeah,
you couldn't take out a Collins S line to a park,
no,
Yeah.
no,
No.
no.
or
even
a
an
big old
HW
hammer.
101 you wouldn't take out.
No,
but,
that's right.
no.
And yeah, every day if I see a POTA guy or girl on, I always call them, give them a contact.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In
So,
fact, earlier this afternoon, I was on 20 meters making a few CW POTA contacts.
Oh yeah.
wow, very cool. The KB6NU, and I'll have all these links in there and that. But you're the number one ham radio blog according to Google. So number one,
Yeah, well,
congratulations.
that's the way I joke. But you know what's happening? This is kind of amusing in a way. Now we have all these YouTubers, and a lot of them are have really good content, and the blog is less. These blogs are less and less. I'm let's put it this way: I'm seeing less and less traffic on my blog over the
Okay.
years. As people are going toward YouTube and podcast, right?
Yeah.
Um, I tried to start a podcast a couple of times, but yeah, it never really took off. There was one guy, and I don't know, you may have even had him on your show here, KE9V Jeff. He does a blog too. I tried to get him to do a podcast with me, but
That
he
sounds,
demurred.
is he a professor?
No,
AE1.
no, he had this he has a blog, ke9v.net, and is a good writer.
Yeah.
And I said to him, I said, Jeff, we should start a podcast. That's the way things are going. And I don't know, he never got a hang of it. But yeah, so we get back to my claim that I'm the number one rated ham radio blog. So Google likes longevity, right? So the longer you're around, the higher you rank. Well, I've been doing this and it's amazing to me to think about this. I've been doing it for over 20 years now.
Really?
Wow.
Yes. The first posts were back in like 2004, I think. And I have over 2,500 posts on my blog.
Wow. Do you
Yeah, I
remember,
know.
do you remember some of the early topics?
Well, yeah. So one of what gets a lot of play, and I wish I was more knowledgeable about this than I am, but it's antennas. So if any kind of antenna blog post gets a lot of traffic, and we're talking about the ARRL. I've been poking at the ARRL for all 20 years too.
So are you replacing Wayne Green or?
Yeah. Well, so sometimes, so I was talking about that. Sometimes in fact, I have a couple of posts like that are titled this. I say, what would Rain Green do?
Yeah.
And, if I have a comment about something, I'll ask myself that and write the blog post in that vein. I'm not as wordy as Wayne Green was, though.
Well,
Wayne Green, I don't know if you've seen any of his columns lately, but his columns would run page after page
yeah.
after page. He could just write and write and write and write.
And
Yeah.
sometimes
I'm a lot more brief.
and it would turn the corner from being entertainment to just being now
Yeah, yeah.
he's churning the
Yeah.
waters, right? So
Or he'd go off on a tangent, like his cold fusion tangent, all that stuff. But
I
anyway,
remember
sometimes I say, like I say, I'll say, what would Rain Green do?
Yeah.
and I
But you still
remember,
have your blog, Dan.
Excuse me?
You still do it every
Oh
day?
yeah. I just posted today. I post about 2 or 3 times a week now. I used to post a lot more frequently, but I
Yeah.
still do 2 or 3 times a week.
Yeah, sure.
I'll tell you the ones I appreciate, and the one I really enjoyed looking at this morning was operating notes. Why do people tune up on frequency?
Oh yeah.
And there is still a place where people have to be, come on, smack them on the wrist, and unfortunately, doing them on the pilot frequency is not the place to do it. But
No, no. Plus they don't get it anyway. They just don't get it.
no,
And so when I write this stuff, it's not really for that guy that tuned up on top of me, because he's going to do that the next
no matter
time
what.
anyway, somebody else. But it's for the other operators who want to be a little bit more considerate.
Yes.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
maybe hadn't thought of that.
Yeah.
And I think there is a lot of that. And a lot of guys are learning the rigs, and unfortunately they choose to drive before knowing where the pedals are. But that
Yeah.
happens. So
Yeah. And that's okay as long as you don't do it, continue to do it.
Right.
And if
That's
they
right.
read my blog and say, "Oh yeah, maybe I shouldn't have done that," well, that's good.
yeah,
Yeah.
no, that's a great point. So
That's
what
what
about
we
the
do.
ICQ podcast? That's not one I've really listened to very much, but I am now because I noticed you're part of it, and I thought, well, that should be interesting. And
Well, yeah. So the ICQ podcast was started by some guys in Great Britain in the UK, and they had me on. I forget about what exactly, and it seemed to me that they didn't have anybody from the U.S. on this podcast. So I said, "Hey, look, I'll appear on your podcast, and I'll be the U.S. correspondent." And so I was. They said, "Yeah, that's a good idea," and I've been doing it ever since. I forget when the first episode I appeared on, but it's been over 5 years. It was before COVID, so
Oh,
it's been a while. And the ICQ podcast has two teams, and we do it every 4 weeks. So the podcast comes out every 2 weeks, but the two teams swap episodes.
okay,
And that works out really nicely. We have, the two teams have their own personalities, and on every episode, Martin Butler, M0, what was his MGB or something? I forget his call sign. Anyway, he's on every podcast. He's the moderator, and then the other people on the panel are the two teams. And we just basically talk about the news, the news in ham radio, and then there's what he calls a feature every episode, and the feature takes a deep dive into whatever topic happens
okay,
to be. Like one feature that Martin and I did jointly was on troubleshooting electronic equipment, and we just talked about our experiences with troubleshooting electronic equipment, like like make sure the power's on first, Heck, honestly, really simple things,
yeah.
but good things, I mean, it really is something to think about.
Yeah, and there's a lot of coaching for guys that have only worked on circuit boards for PCs and now they're inside an amplifier. It's like,
Right,
no, no,
right.
you really do want to take your watch and ring off. You really do, trust me.
Yep, 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 yep.
So well, what's cool about that podcast though, or any of them, I guess, that have had a certain amount of time, maybe this topic or that topic isn't of interest, but when you can scroll over 6 or 8 years worth of stuff, there's a ton of things in there that are very, very interesting. So I enjoy that. It's a great way to kind of bring yourself up to date on things or get educated because you have all this material out there. And that's very cool. I kind of enjoyed that. So let's switch gears now. We're going to talk about teaching ham radio classes. I mean, you're into everything. And this is one thing I don't think personally I would try just because I don't know if I don't have confidence in that I know stuff, or I don't know what it is. But so again, kudos to you for
Well,
doing it.
well, thank you.
So talk
So,
about the
so,
one. Go ahead.
so, it's just like everything in ham radio, not everything in ham radio is for everybody, right?
Right.
yeah.
Um, um, that's fine. Um, I got into it because the fellow here in Ann Arbor who was teaching the classes at the time decided to retire from doing that. He got up in years, and I wanted to try out this 1 day tech class format. He had been teaching a more traditional kind of class, and it worked out really well, and it's taken off from there. So I've been doing that now for at least 15 years, and I easily have taught over 1,000 people. I haven't kept really good records. I should have kept better records, but I'm sure I'm over 1,000 people by now.
Wow.
And yeah, I mean it's been great.
What a hoot.
I've taught a lot of different places. I taught at Dayton actually a couple of years. We did a 1 day tech class at Dayton for a couple of times.
So what
Um,
is your approach to the 1 day tech class? Is it covering the test pool and then do they get a question pool and then they get a test at the end of the day to see where they're at, or how do you do that?
yeah, exactly. I use my study guide, and fortunately, and this was serendipitous too. fortunately, the format of my study guide fit the format of the 1 day tech class perfectly.
Oh,
So I covered when I start teaching the class, I start at chapter 1 in the book and go through chapter 10, just in lockstep order. In fact, I tried changing it one time because I thought, well, maybe logically I could move these chapters around. And the students got lost because they were expecting it to just flow like the book. And then I started talking about something else and they said, well, where are you? We can't find it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, I went back to the book. But yeah, so usually start at 9 a.m. I teach till 3:30 p.m. We take a half-hour break for lunch. So I cover all 413 questions
wow.
in 6 hours. And what I do, first off, I tell people they really need to at least read the book once or twice before they come to class, just to have some familiarity with the material. Because I'm not really teaching the material, right? I'm teaching
Yeah.
the answers to the test. And knowing why they're the right answers does help. But since so much of it is so many of the questions you can only get right by memorizing the answer, you have to do a little bit of preparation before you come to the class. But where was I? What was I going to say? Um, yeah, we just blast right through it. And as I go along, I'm always telling stories about my ham radio experiences. Like for example, the example I always give is really kind of a funny one. I try to keep the atmosphere kind of light. So there's a question in the test about using a ferrite snap-on ferrite choke for reducing interference. And I tell the story that this actually happened to me when I got back into ham radio. I decided I'm going to put up a 40-meter dipole in my backyard. So I set up the dipole. I had an antenna analyzer. I tuned the antenna. I got it, pretty good. And I went downstairs where my radio is, and I started calling CQ. Well, the next thing that happened is my wife runs down the stairs. She says, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I put up an antenna. I'm calling CQ." She says, "You're opening and closing the garage door." It's true.
Yeah.
I was opening and closing the garage door. So what had happened, and this explains the whole point of this ferrite choke. What had happened was the antenna and the wire connecting the switch to the actual garage door opener were not quite parallel, but pretty well parallel. So there was a lot of coupling between the antenna, the RF being put out by the antenna, and this wire. And the garage door opener had like little or no noise filtering on it. So what did I do? I took one of these ferrite chokes, wrapped the wire around it a few times, connected it back to the garage door opener, and it hasn't opened since. So
Yeah.
at least not when I'm transmitting.
Yeah.
But that's going to make them feel good. Here's a real life episode, and that is something that'll stick with them, right? So
Yeah. And
Yes.
and I, like Henny Youngman, you say, I got a million of them, and I got after a long time, I have a lot of stories.
so
And see, and that's what I think people will remember, Dan,
Right.
because they'll do that same thing at home, and all of a sudden their doorbell alarm keeps going off every time
Right.
they transmit. And they'll
Right.
say, "Well, I remember Dan, and he put some kind of a thing on the cable, and away we go."
yeah.
Right. So not only will they get the question right, then they'll have that knowledge when they set up their own stations.
Yes.
So how do you think your success rate has been? I mean, do they take the exam at the end of the day, or they're just
Right.
ready?
Right. Right. So
Oh,
right at 3:30,
Oh, wow.
the volunteer examiners come in and give them the test before they can forget too much.
Oh, wow. Okay. And
yeah.
pretty good hit rate so far?
I haven't kept the best records, but I'm going to guesstimate 85 to 90%.
No kidding.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Good for you.
Wow. Congratulations.
Yes.
So do you ever follow up on those folks and say, who went on to actually and then what do you kind of help, tell them, okay, you have this technician's class license, here's what you can do with it. And do they go off and do that, do you think? Or
So we even talk about some of that in the class, right? I mean, there's questions about meteor scatter and operating satellites and
Yeah.
all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. So we talk about that right in the class already. And talking about CW, there's some CW questions. I say, well, as a technician, you can operate CW on 80, 40, 15, and 10. And 10 meters is real good now. At the last couple of classes, I said, yeah, you get on 10 meters and work the world. And then when I tell them, and not a lot of people take me up on this, but always tell them, hey, look, you can consider me your mentor now. If you have a question about anything, feel free to email me, and I'll help you do whatever it is you need to do. Put up an antenna, whatever it is. I'll help them. I'll help them choose a radio, whatever it is.
Wow.
And the way it so. People get technician class licenses for a lot of different reasons, right? Not all of them really want to be ham radio operators. Their spouse has a ham license, so they want to get their license, or their dad was, so they thought, well, yeah, I'll get a license because my
Yeah.
dad was a ham. Whatever it is. So the way I sort of judge my success is how many of the people in my class are still active and doing things. And I'll tell you one of my big success stories, and we talked about POTA a little bit earlier. One of the guys in one of my classes is now the guy who's the head of software development for Parks on the Air.
Really?
Yeah,
Really?
yeah. You know, uh, I joke. I taught him everything he knows about ham radio, but of course he's gone farther than that. I mean, he knows he's gone farther than that. Let's put it that way, especially with POTA. And but anyway, another way I sort of gauge my success is I go to Hamfest. So I go to Hamfest and sell books. I gauge part of my success, the gauge of my success is how many people will come up to me and say, "Oh, hey, I got your book, and now I have a general class license." Or,
Yeah.
"Yeah, I remember." They'll say, "Oh, remember I was in your class 10 years ago." Well, of course, I don't necessarily remember them, but
Yeah.
they'll say that. Well, if they're still a ham after 10 years, yeah, that's a
Yep.
feather in my cap.
I think so. Yep. Well,
So
that's
Dan, I got a quick follow-up on that. Have you ever thought about a general class? I'm sure it would be more than a day, but have
Well,
you?
right. So I have taught some general classes. And one of the things that happens with general classes, which is sort of puts me off teaching more of them, is that what happens is when they get to the point where they want to get a general class license, they they're already I would when what I want to say, passionate about ham radio. So they'll jump through the topics before I cover them in class. And
Yeah.
so half of them, or more than half, will end up actually getting the license before the class is finished. And then they stop coming to class.
Yeah.
So we get to the end and there's, like less than half the people in the class then at that point.
yeah.
So, I hate to like force them to come to class, but hey, I'm preparing these classes.
Yeah.
If they don't show up, it's kind of like,
Yeah. Disappointing.
yeah.
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 But I tell them, I'll tell people, look, if you get my study guide, or even if you don't get my study guide, somebody else's study guide, and you got questions about any of the material, still call me or email me, and we'll talk about it.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, we don't necessarily have a formal class, but I'm still ready to help them get up, upgrade their license.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'd be afraid of, even if I had my license, it's like, okay, there's 3 more weeks. There's probably a lot of stuff I can still learn, even if I pass the test. So I think it would still be interesting to finish the course out, but
Yeah.
um, the one that got my eye though, everything on a lot of great stuff on your webpage, but uh, I think this is missing because, I had my dad was my mentor, but Mr. Volmer was the science teacher at Mount Healthy High School, and he was in the ham radio. So even at those times, when I start coaching AAU basketball, we used to tell parents who thought their kids were all world, they would say, they're gonna run into the fumes test. It's either going to be perfume or car fumes, and that's going
Yeah.
to get them out of basketball. So sorry, but that's the reality, right? So in high school, we had Mr. Vollmer who would pull, like I was in other stuff, but he kind of kept my interest going, and then my dad did. But that's not happening anymore. So when I saw your parents' guide to ham radio, I really wanted to drill down on that. I think that is terrific. So why don't you talk about that?
Well, so we used to have a club station at a local science museum. And the science museum was really geared toward kids. And in a way, there was a little bit of a mismatch there because the demographic was like 10 and under, and kids don't necessarily understand ham radio till they're at
Yeah.
least 10 or 11 or 12. But
Yeah.
anyway, I'd get questions from parents, right? And so I said, well, I'll write this up. I'll write it up that see what, so parents would know what to expect. And even if they didn't want to get licenses themselves, they would at least
Hmm.
know how to help their kids, in their quest for ham radio, to become ham radio operators. So I tell you the truth, I haven't thought about that uh, document for a while. I probably need to update it, but and I don't know how many people have actually downloaded it, but yeah, it's there. If somebody wants to get it.
That's really cool. I just
Yeah,
think that,
interesting.
and I am going to grab it because my when my grandkids come down, it's like I'll have Morse code on more often than not. And oftentimes I'll be to something else. I'm just listening, and yet when they come down, if they hear it to them, it's just noise. So I'll go up to the sideband. I'll try to find some interesting. So I may pull that down just to make sure that I'm doing everything I can to pique their interest. So.
Well, and
Uh,
if you do, and you see where it could be updated, please let me know, and I'll update it.
Well, I think one thing you could do is at the end where it says any questions, you need to direct them to Joe. That's probably the one. That's the one thing. The
Yeah,
one
bring
thing
them
that,
on.
Joe and I both kind of compared notes. Neither one of us really know anything about the ARDC. And I always
Oh,
feel
okay.
a little embarrassed to say that, but I
Yes.
don't. I just don't. So can you
Well,
elaborate on that
you
for
know
us?
what? You know what? You're saying that is like uh, I won't say a personal slap at me, but I was their first communications manager, which was like their PR guy. So that you don't know about them is sort of a reflection on me.
Well,
Not too big a
it
deal.
didn't mean anything, but
No, I know. Um, and there's lots of hams, so not everybody's going to know it, obviously.
right.
But I'll tell you a little bit about it. So back in the day, in the 1980s, before the internet really got established, one ham radio operator, Hank Magnuski, KA6M, had the foresight to ask for some IP addresses for amateur radio. And at the time, there was one guy who was doling out these IP addresses. So he asked this guy if we could get some for ham radio experimentation.
So this is
And this
like
guy
back
said,
in this is back in the IP4 only days.
yes,
Yeah,
yes,
okay. All right.
yes, before they even thought about IPv6.
Yeah.
And so there wasn't a lot of demand in the late 80s because nobody even knew what it was, right?
No.
So he gave us the whole 44 block, 16 million IPv4 addresses. So any IP address that starts with 44, well, at least it used to be, was for ham radio use. So up until about the early 2000s, these addresses were doled out by an ad hoc group of hams. This like two or three guys that were just doing this on an informal basis. And along about 2005, I think, and this story is actually on the ADC website, and I wrote that, by the way. The Internet Authority, which got to be bigger than just the one guy, said, "Hey, look, you guys need to be more formal about this." So they formed a nonprofit corporation, a California nonprofit corporation called Amateur Radio Digital Communications, ARDC.
Okay.
So they now this nonprofit was doing all this administration of these IPv4 addresses. Well, along about 2018, 2019, they started saying, well, look, we've never used even half of these 16 million IP addresses, IPv4 addresses. Now they've gotten to be very valuable because there's no new IPv4 addresses being minted. And why they said, why don't we sell some of them? And with that money, we can start a foundation and give out grants to ham radio projects. And so that's exactly what they did. They sold a
Oh,
quarter of the addresses, 4 million of those addresses
Hmm.
to basically to Amazon. I used to say to a big internet retailer who I cannot name, but since I'm not an employee anymore, I can name them
okay.
for over $100 million dollars. And they then formed the foundation and transitioned ARDC from a nonprofit corporation to a private foundation. And they've been giving out grants ever since. Now, it's this is an interesting story because so when they again they tried to do this on a sort of a volunteer basis for a while, and but the job was way too big. They had to hire somebody, some people to actually be a real foundation, right? And so they did. They hired an executive director and a grants manager, and they had were having community meetings. They call them community meetings, and I happened to find out about it. I forget exactly how. I think it was on Twitter or something. And I attended. It was a Zoom meeting. I attended the Zoom meeting, and one of the first things they said was, "Hey, we're having a hard time giving away this money because nobody knows about us." And I said to myself, that's me. They need to hire me because that's what I do, right?
Right.
And so I convinced them to hire me, and I worked for them for 2 years as the almost 2 years as communication manager. And my job was to get them publicity, which I did. I got them on got them into the ARRL news. I got them on different podcasts. I got them on ham radio, Ham Nation at least
Right.
once. All those kind of things. I mean, I knew how to do that. And by the time I left, not quite 2 years later, they had plenty of people applying for these grants. And that's one reason I quit because my job was basically done. In
Well, now
fact,
that
that's what I
you've
told them.
so now that you've explained it, I do recall this being discussed on Ham Radio Workbench a couple episodes ago. I just didn't, I guess I didn't remember ARDC. So,
Right,
I wa-
right.
so what kind of grants can you apply for? So, for instance, I'll tell you where I'm always looking for money. We've got a
Sure.
DX, I've got a DX club, Southwest Ohio. I don't have it. We have the Southwest Ohio DX club, and every year we have the largest DX dinner in the world at Hamvention Weekend. And every year the Marriott soaks us for about $4 grand for projectors and audio. And I keep thinking, if I had $10,000, I could buy what we needed, I could keep it, and I could use it 4, 5, 6 years. But where am I going to get $10,000? So is that something that would, or is
You
that a
know,
quarter
pri
trick?
Yeah, probably not.
Okay, all right,
Um, what the in the early days when we first started giving grants, a lot of clubs would ask for money for like communications trailers, something that could be used in that along that line, like reaching out to the community and stuff like that.
sure.
There's been a lot of grants given to education projects. A lot of almost, well, I won't say almost all, but a big chunk of the ARRL scholarships are actually funded by ARDC. So those are the kind of things
Okay.
they're most interested in. But I mean, it's a you know what you might do? You might actually apply for an ARRL grant, even though it's funded by ARDC. The ARDC gives them the money and then lets them
All right.
dole it out. So that, I mean, that's a possibility. Not only that, if you're talking about $10,000, it's, they like to let the ARRL give out those lower value amounts and then, give more money to the bigger projects. Like
What?
for example,
Okay.
Sure.
they gave I think it was over $200,000 to a group in Colorado who are putting together a backbone, sort of a not an internet backbone, but an IP backbone using radio, microwave links and such in Colorado.
Okay.
So, in the case that the internet would go out, theoretically, the emergency communications people could use the radio backbone.
Okay.
There's a similar project in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area. It's called I forget what it's called, And there's also a similar project in Europe called HamNet, which is ARDC funded.
Joe,
So,
go
so
ahead.
those are the kinds of things that ARDC is big on.
So,
They've also funded amateur radio technology development. So, for example, you may have heard of M17.
yes.
Well, ARDC was one of the first foundations to invest in
Wow.
M17.
Okay.
Free DV is another technology project they've funded.
Very cool.
GNU Radio is another group that gets ARDC funds.
So
So
even
they're
if I
really into
time, go ahead, Joe.
they're really into big projects.
What do you mean?
Well, they're into big money projects.
Oh
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah.
Like those infrastructure projects, it could be easily over $200,000.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, good for them.
Because
So can-
because so this is how it works too, right? If you're a private foundation, you have to give out 5% of your total assets every year. Well, if you got $110 million, you got to give out $5.5 million every year.
Gee,
Yeah, you have to. So that's
Yeah.
very
Right.
interesting.
yeah.
But scholarships are a big thing too, right? So they funded a lot of Society of Women Engineers scholarships, ARRL for one, a bunch of other kind of things like that.
Sure.
Okay.
Oh,
So
After I quit, I said to myself, I should get some of this money. And so one of the things I was able to get a grant for was to teach my one-day tech class at events that should have more amateur radio content. So last year in 2024, I went to 4 quote unquote hacker conferences, and I taught one-day tech classes there. So the first one was the Hope Conference in New York City. That's run by 2600 magazine. If you're familiar with that, that's
yeah.
a real hacker publication. The next event I went to was DEF CON, which is like the
That's
mother
the
of
big
all
one. Yep.
in Las Vegas. In Las Vegas, there were actually 90 people in the room.
really?
Yeah, 90. There was 90 people. That's the biggest class I've taught so far, 90 people.
Wow.
And then I went to a couple of smaller ones in the Philadelphia area. But I'm going back to Philadelphia in a couple of weeks. I'll be at the Philadelphia Maker Fair.
Okay. The
And I'm
Philly
gonna
Maker Fair.
Yeah,
Oh,
on April 5th. Well,
Wow.
April 6th is when the class will take place.
Wow. Joe, did you
Yeah,
have
so
another I think I cut you off. Did you have another question, Joe? Or
no.
okay. So if
I'm hoping to get this. I've applied again this year, and I'm hoping to get the grant again this year to do it again for 4 more times.
it would seem with the results you're getting, they'd be silly not to.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty confident I'll get it because the grant was for $18,000, so it's not a big
Right.
grant, but I think it has a big impact for that amount of money.
So if I were to put up, and I can't even think of a scenario now. Let's say I have a new ham application that has I need a static IP address for it. Can I go to them and get one of these 44 block?
Oh yeah,
Oh, okay.
absolutely.
You can. Okay.
Yeah, they'll give you 4 or 8 or
Like
at the drop of a hat,
slash
really.
a slash 32 or something, right? They'll give you the
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Very interesting.
Yeah, and so that I mean that's a good point because now they're still doing the administration of the 44 net. They're calling it 44 net now, which is the set of IP addresses in the 44 range,
Right.
and they're doing the grants. So they're still doing both.
Interesting. Well, I certainly didn't mean to cast aspersions on your work. And more than anything, it wasn't. I'll be honest. I'm not a digital bigot one way or the other. But probably when I heard, ARDC, oh, that's some kind of an amateur radio digital thing, and I'm just going to tune out at this point. So I'm sure you did fine work. It was ignorance on my part. So,
And of course, I thought it was something to do with FT8.
yeah.
No.
So one follow-up question I had on your blog is, do you get a lot of feedback? I mean, other than just comments, do people send you stuff and say, well, I wanted to post this, but I really don't want to post it, but
Yeah, sometimes I do, not real frequently. I get a lot of comments, get a lot of feedback, like on the books. They'll say, "Oh yeah, thanks for writing these books," and that kind of makes it worthwhile, right? But I will get comments about what I've written, like especially when I poke the ARRL a little bit. They'll say, "Oh yeah, you're right on there," and no, you probably weren't.
Yeah.
I didn't like your tone of voice there sometimes, but
Do you? I'm just curious. Do you moderate it, or do you let them put out whatever it is they're saying?
well, mostly I let it go. But sometimes there'll be comments that are personal attacks
Yeah.
on whoever, me
Right.
or whoever, and I don't go for that.
Good for you.
Uh,
Okay.
Yeah.
if the like one he had recently, some guy used profane language, and it's like, well, he might have had a point, but I'm not going to let that kind of language.
Right.
Yeah.
And the sad thing is, the English language is so rich. He could have made that point effectively five other ways,
Correct.
and you wouldn't
Yeah.
have tweaked it. So
Correct.
I think blogging is a lost art. I used to follow blogs all over the place, and the one that's gone away. And I don't know if you ever followed Paul N6PSE. Paul had a terrific DX blog, and it seemed that he had three or four people that continued to want to make it political.
Yeah.
And he just I think he got tired of it, and he finally
Yeah.
said, "Look, this is my last one and I'm done." And I thoroughly enjoyed his, and it was one of the few times I would interact with and leave comments and stuff, and it really did get kind of personal. It's like, I got more stuff to do than have
Right.
to worry,
Yeah.
hold my breath every time I start my car. So
Right. Right.
you
Right.
know
Right.
oh my goodness. Well, so what do you like to do when you're not doing all this content stuff and you're not teaching and you're not do you get on the
Look, at this point, ham radio is my life. It's
okay.
seriously.
Well,
So I do POTA. When the weather's nice, I'll do POTA. I did quite a bit last year. I would go 2 or 3 times a week. I have over 1,000 contacts at two of the closest parks to
Wow.
me,
gee.
and so I got the POTA awards to prove it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll tell you one fun story about POTA though. Um, So this guy I mentioned who is now does the software for POTA. His call sign is WATAM, and he does a great job at it. He said to me one time, he says, "You know what?" He says, "I want to take you out on a rove." Well, what in POTA language, a rove is doing as many parks in a day as you can.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
And in a way, that's like the beauty of POTA too, right? Because there's different ways you can enjoy it. You can be like me and go and sit at a park bench for a couple hours and make 80 to 100 contacts, or you can do like what he does and go to as many parks as possible. So he says, I want to do this with you. I says, yeah, let's do it. And so we actually did do 10 different parks in like six
really?
hours.
Wow.
I know, I know. And
Yes.
he knew all the parks because that's his.
Yeah.
And this guy, matter of fact, this guy, he has over 1,000 parks.
Wow.
I know. And he's got a car. He's got a like a big SUV. Is it a Tacoma? I don't know, something
Yeah.
pretty big with a big screwdriver antenna on it. And that's what he does. He'll go. He like one year he did like up and down the Mississippi River. Hit all the parks up and down the Mississippi.
Really?
Yeah, a couple years ago, he went out to California and went up and down the coast.
Huh. I never
And
thought of that.
and he's got over 1,000 parks. He's done almost all the parks in Michigan, and there's like over 400 in Michigan.
Wow. And then you
So
have to make what, 3 or 5 QSOs at each one,
10,
and then you go to the next one, right?
right,
Yeah.
Wow.
right.
Yeah.
So that's what we would do is we'd go to in fact, I didn't get it at first. Like we got to the first park, and I was doing this all in CW, and I made like I don't know 10, 15 or 20, and he says, we should go into the next one, and it's like, oh yeah, I guess so. So we went to the next one, made a dozen, then went to the next one, made a dozen.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we did 10 in 10 parks in one day. And I got the award to prove it too. They call that the Rhino Rover Award.
Wow.
If you operate from 10 entities in one single day, you get this award. And that's kind of the cool thing about POTA too. I mean, there's something for everybody. Like if you're into these awards, I'm not really, although I like to point out to some of them that are kind of amusing. But if you're into awards, they got awards for everything, you know.
Yeah.
You got like there's if you make 1,000 from a park, they got that. If you make like so many at night, you get the late shift award. If you get so many like early in the morning, you get the I don't know, I forget what they call it, but there's some kind of award for that. There's awards for everything.
Yeah. It's a
Wow.
big deal, isn't it?
Yeah, oh yeah. People love it. People love it.
So
Well,
Dan, what kind of radio do you have at home?
I have an IC 7610. That's my main radio.
Uh,
that's
I
your
do,
main radio, right, Joe?
Yeah.
I do too. I love it. I'm
Ah,
an icon guy.
beautiful. Yeah,
Yeah.
I see
Wow.
that.
Yeah. What
And
about antennas?
I sometimes joke that I'm an Icon fanboy. And you know, I had a Flex for a while. And you know, Flex is a great radio. I mean, all these radios are really good radios.
Yeah.
But something, you know, the interface for an Icon, the Icon interface, like I work well with it. You know, I've been an Icon guy from way back. Like the
Yep.
first radio I bought when I came to Michigan in the 1980s was an IC 735. And then I had a 746 Pro, and then I
Yep.
had a 7300 for a while. And then I got the Flex. I got away from Icon. And I don't know, I wanted real buttons and knobs, so I got the 7610.
Yeah. Yeah. I've had icons for years and years. What about antennas?
Well, I don't have much in the way of antennas here, really. My antenna here is you ever hear of a Cobra antenna?
Yeah.
So that's what I use. I have a homebrew Cobra antenna.
Huh. So
Probably
what do you
not.
use when you go POTA-ing?
Well, so I've blogged about this. You can read about my experience with antennas. Here in Ann Arbor, our club has this thing we call it the AMT meetings, Aero Mobile and Portable. And one time they're having it in a park right near my house. It's kind of like mini field day. It's kind of like a cross between POTA and field day. This was before POTA even we started. And I said, well, okay, I'm going to just screw around and see what I got here to make an antenna, right? And I talk about wire wrap. I had a spool of wire wrap wire that I'd
30
gotten
G. Oh my God.
from a previous employer. They were just going to throw it away, so I rescued it.
Yeah.
And I had some twisted pair wire. I said, hey, I bet I could use that as a feed line. So I put together a 66-foot doublet with the wire wrap wire as the elements and the twisted pair as a feed line, and it worked. You know, I had a KX1 at the time with an internal antenna tuner. KX1 tuned it up just fine on certainly
Oh,
on
yeah.
40 meters. It
Wow.
worked. It worked great.
Yeah.
And it,
Well, over the years, I've refined that antenna. So now it's kind of the same antenna, but it's got totally different parts now. Like the wire is some actual stealth antenna wire that somebody gave me. The feed line is now actually 300 ohm twin lead.
okay.
And now I have a KX3 and I feed that into the KX3, which tunes it up on everything from 40 through 10.
Yeah.
Huh. So
So,
I did winter field day with my friend Brian, 88 FD, and he's a POTA guy. And I'd not, out of ignorance, I'd not been around POTA guys. So
yeah.
he comes out and he's got this little stand, snaps it down, the vertical goes up. He's got these clip-on radials, the little tuner box, and all of a sudden he's on the air. It's like,
Yeah.
how did
Yeah.
you do that? I can't
Yeah.
even get
Yeah.
radials spread out that quickly, and he's on the air. I was so impressed with Brian and what he was doing. It was just great. So
Well, so when I get to I could do the same thing. So and what I use this doublet in an inverted V configuration. I support the center with a spider beam mast, fiberglass mast. And by the time from the time I arrive at a park to the time I'm on the air is between 20 and 30 minutes.
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean
I bet.
you just get you get into that groove and you I mean you just do it.
And when
Yeah.
I go on big D expeditions, we do that in 2 days.
Yeah.
Yeah. You probably set up a lot more antennas, you
Yeah.
know.
Yes.
And you have to worry about seagulls, Joe. He doesn't have to worry about seagulls.
Yeah.
Well, actually, you know, we do have seagulls here in
Yeah,
Michigan,
they do in Michigan. That's
but
right.
they don't get too close.
So is everything up there really maize and blue or
Oh yeah, well, especially here in Ann Arbor. I'm in Ann
yeah.
Arbor,
Yeah, I
Yeah.
especially
know.
here in Ann Arbor. Yeah.
Yeah, we're just south of Columbus, so it's yeah, I know
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, Joe, did I forget anything?
Boy, I think we covered it pretty good, Bill.
Well, Dan, if you know the definition of an elevator talk, and I imagine it very well could be in your parents' guide, which I'm definitely going to hit here in a little bit. But well, if somebody says, "Oh, you're one of those ham radio guys," why, is that really worth looking into? What would you tell them?
Well, I just say, if you're interested in technology, right, and interested in talking to people all over the world without using the internet, ham radio's for you. We
Yes.
have a lot of fun. It's more than just talking to people. There's a lot of technology involved. A lot of people still make their own stuff. That's the message I give to these hacker people because that's what they do. They hack.
Right,
It says,
right.
yeah, you can hack on this stuff, both hardware and software now. And if you need to know more, talk to me.
Yeah. So we
So
had a
Dan,
guy on, what was it, a year and a half ago, Joe, about 3D printing. And
yeah,
he's a ham, and that was one of his things when he would go. He says, "Hey, you could build your own radio cases. You can build these feed
Yeah,
and dipole winders and all this stuff."
yeah,
And, there were a number of people that got interested because he was kind of talking their language. So
yeah,
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 no, you're 100% right. Go
so
ahead, Joe.
Dan, about your real quick about your book,
yeah.
that you teach the class with, is that something people buy from you? They download? How does all that work?
Well, that's good. I'm glad you asked that question. So I have study guides for each of the three licenses, Tech, General, and Extra.
Okay,
Um, I have EPUB versions, electronic versions of all three. Print versions they can buy from Amazon. I don't sell the print versions myself, but the electronic versions they can buy on my website, KB6NU.com.
okay,
And I give away the tech version, the PDF version of the tech study guide for free.
Okay.
So if somebody, and I have cards that I give out, say, in fact, I was at this ham fest and some guy was looking at the tech study guide. I said, hey, look, if you need a book, I'll be happy to sell that to you. But I gave him my card and I said, look, right here is the URL. You can download it for free. So you can download the tech study guide for free on my website. And I haven't kept good records of it, but one year I did uh, do a traffic analysis of the website. And one year I gave away over 20,000 of them.
Wow.
really?
Yeah. Yeah. So, so
Wow.
anyway, that's it. You can get the free study guide from my website. But if you prefer other versions, there's a small charge.
Yeah,
Electronic versions are $10 each.
Okay.
sure.
And I will put show links in the show notes for sure because
Yeah.
I'd like to see him do that. So,
Uh,
well, what did I forget, Dan? What else should I have asked you about?
Well,
How's the
probably
hunting?
nothing. Otherwise, we'd be here forever.
The hunting and the
oh,
fishing's okay, or you're just going to the park to talk to people? Have you had
Yeah.
anybody approach you in the park? Like, so K4SWL told us he had somebody come up asking, "Sir, are you a spy?"
Well, one time the people do come up to you, and actually that's another cool thing about POTA is that you can promote ham radio, but
sure.
what I also like to do lighthouses. I like to operate from lighthouses,
Oh,
and fortunately, a lot of the POTA parks have lighthouses here in Michigan. Anyway, Michigan. Here's a fun fact: Michigan has the most lighthouses of any state in the union.
Really?
Yeah,
really?
yeah. There's like 120 of them or some I
Yeah.
forget the exact number off the top of my head, but there's a lot.
I guess it
Anyway,
makes
well,
sense, right? Okay.
excuse me?
I guess it makes sense because they're surrounded
Oh
by.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
surrounded by
Okay.
water.
Yeah. And Michigan has the most coastline of any state aside from Florida, I think.
Wow.
Oh, yeah.
It's really kind of amazing. But so one time I'm at this one of the lighthouses I've operated a lot from is called the Point O'Bark Lighthouse, and that's in the Thumb, right? If you look at Michigan, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, I don't know how it, but the thumb, it's like right here up at the tip of the thumb. And I saw one guy came up to me and he said to me, "Well, are you talking to the ships out in the lake?" I said, "Well, no,
No,
no."
it's a good
But
idea, but
but
no.
that's what people will ask about a lot if you're in a spot where you're
Yeah.
near the lakes.
Yeah, I'm trying to find the Edmund Fitzgerald. That's what I'm doing here, and
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
maybe you
Yeah.
know the song. Yeah,
yeah,
Yeah.
oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
very, very interesting. Wow, very,
Yeah.
and I love your enthusiasm, and I love your what an ambassador for ham radio you are. So kudos to you.
Well,
Uh,
it's. I mean, you know this, right? Ham radio is too much fun.
it is.
Just too
It
much,
is.
and that so you asked what I tell people. That's what I tell them too. I said we just have a lot of fun doing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
Some
the
guys
most.
go golfing, we go play on the radio.
Yeah,
It's the most work you can do and just enjoy the heck out of it. I mean,
yeah,
who would think a bunch of guys would get together to help somebody put up 100-foot beam, a 100-foot tower
right.
on a hot
Yeah.
day in July and come away saying, "Man, wasn't that a good time?"
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Man, oh man.
Yeah.
Well, Dan,
Yeah.
thank you so much. I know you're busy. You're clearly a busy guy, and you carved out some time for us, and we had to do the reschedule. So I appreciate your patience and flexibility, and that was huge, enjoyable. And I hope everybody jumps on your blog and follows that along. And as I get feedback, I'll send it to you. So, boy, I
Well,
sure
I'm glad
appreciate it.
I'm glad we finally got a chance to do this as well.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah, this
glad.
is very interesting. Thank you very much, Dan.
Yeah,
I
it really, really
appreciate it.
was. So, all right, sir. Well, have a good evening, good weekend, and good DX to you. And we'll catch up soon.
We'll
Same to
see you
you.
on POTA.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Look for me on
Joe and
Twitter
I
meeting.
we're gonna do it this summer. I don't know quite how we
Yeah.
figured it out yet, but we're gonna do it. I think that'll be fun. All right,
Okay,
thanks, sir.
guys.
7-3, guys.
7-3.
Thank you
Thanks.
very much.
I hope you found that as interesting as I did. Thank you for joining us on this edition of the DX Mentor. I would like to thank our sponsors, ICOM America, the Daily DX, DX Engineering, and the Southwest Ohio DX Association. You won't find anyone more committed to DX than those sponsors. I would also like to thank our guests today, Dan, KB6NU, and Joe, W8GEX. I would especially like to thank you, our listener and viewer. Without you, there would be no reason to do this. I would love to have your feedback, answer your questions, and provide help with any DX or amateur-related issues you may be having. If you need clarification on something or you just have a question, always email me at thedxmentor@gmail.com. Please drop me a line if you've achieved an all-time new one, receive recognition, or have a DX event you would like us to mention. We would be happy to do that. If you're enjoying these DX Mentor episodes, please hit the subscribe button. You can also click like if you found this one particularly interesting. Don't forget, you can check out our Facebook page, The DX Mentor, as well. 7-3 for this episode, and thanks to my ex-wife Karen for her love and support. I hope to see you in the pile-ups.